Hello and welcome to episode 116 of our SAP on Azure Video Podcast. Today is October 26th, and together with Robert and Goran, we are here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hey. So 2 weeks ago, the German Speaking SAP User Group had its annual conference in Leipzig, Germany. There were a lot of news, and we have touched actually on some of them in previous episodes. One session during that event got me actually thinking. Christian Braukmüller and Marcel Scherer had hosted a session about Auf der Suche nach Nachhaltigkeit, Vorsicht by Greenwashing. So basically something like on the search for sustainability, look out for greenwashing. In their presentation, they talked a lot about sustainability, carbon footprint, and raised the question how companies are dealing with sustainability topics in general. Due to the rising costs of electricity, a lot of companies start to think more about saving energy. Although still not top of mind for everyone, the topics around carbon footprint is also getting more traction. So after a few discussions with Christian and Marcel, I wanted to follow up internally and see what Microsoft is doing in this area. And of course, I found in Paul the perfect colleague to talk about it. So in this episode, we want to talk a little about saving energy, sustainability, and related topics. And since this is something where there's so much to talk about, we'll skip the news session for this week and hand over directly to Paul. So Paul, you have been here on the podcast a few times already, but still, for those who have not seen you in the previous episodes, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself, and then let's dive into the sustainability topic at Microsoft.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, guys. I keep getting impressed that this number keeps ratcheting up, that you guys are in the hundreds of these. That's so cool. Anyways, Paul, I work out of a group of our facilities called the Microsoft Technology Centers. Within my role, I actually focus on three core things for Microsoft. One is cybersecurity, and that's what we've talked about with Holger and Goran, over the course of the last few sessions. I talk about what we do internally for cybersecurity, as well as what we would advocate that you do, plus all of the products that we make. Part two, I focus on our research and development. And so there's a little bit of that in here. And in that world, I'm discussing the science of what Microsoft works on. Lastly, I also focus on our data center strategies, which is the fun part about today. So in this world, I'm talking about why our data centers are so different. And honestly, people have expectations when they walk into a data center. They assume that they're going to feel freezing cold rooms with raised floors and rows of servers, and then they step into ours and none of that is there, and they have to kind of rewrap their brain around all of it. So I'm going to talk to you about some of that today.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I think that is really something really interesting. And again, I also had the opportunity to visit two data centers actually in Amsterdam here and in Dublin, and it is amazing. It is really, really amazing. And I often then get the question from, or actually I was with a customer in one of these data centers, and one of those guys was the owner of their own data centers. So it was a big automotive company. So they had their own data centers, and when we were driving back from the Azure region, he was sitting next to me in the bus and he was saying, look, this is so different from what we are doing. And they were a big company. I mean, they had not your small rented rack somewhere. They had their own data centers, but they were just blown away by the scale and differences that we do in our data centers. So that was really eye-opening for me as well.
Yeah, I've had a lot of really large enterprise customers come through, and they all come through with a chip on their shoulder, like, "Oh, we're really good at data centers," and they walk out with their kind of head down, like, "I don't know what I'm doing." So, and that's the way I felt too when I first stepped into them. Like, I come from a data center background. Like, I used to coach, I used to teach hosting companies how to build facilities, and when I first stepped into our facilities, I'm like, I know nothing. I have to kind of rethink everything that I thought that I knew about data centers. And so this will be fun, I hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you want me to just dive right in?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let me share a screen with you guys. And Holger, let me know if you're seeing that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So just big picture, like, I'm going to get all of the kind of the general information out of the way really quickly. First of all, Microsoft, this is not a passive conversation for us. I mean, in other words, we're not just thinking about it idly and saying, oh, how can we take some of what we do and make it a marketing initiative around what we're doing around sustainability? That is not the case. The problem for Microsoft is what we realize is because of the scale of which we run our facilities, if we screw up our power usage, for example, you suffer. If you're screwing up your power usage, we suffer. So we see this as something that we share, not something that we own. Okay, so like, for example, you know, when it says right here that we've been carbon neutral since 2012, what that means is basically for about 8 years, we purchased carbon offsets, or what we did is we invested in green technologies to offset our dirty power usage, like coal, for example. And so like here where I live in Chicago, we pre-purchased our power for 20 years from something called the Pilot Hill Wind Farm. So basically we prepaid for our wind energy for 20 years to offset the coal power that comes out of Illinois here in Chicago. Yeah, so like that's just one example, and there's others, and there's news articles from Dublin, there's news articles from Amsterdam around how each of them like as using different wind, solar, hydro, whatever power to offset any dirty power that we used. Starting in 2020, so 2 years ago, though, we are now 60% off of the dirty grid. In other words, we're getting there. Our goal all up, and by the way, that 2012 and 2020 numbers, that's as a company, not just as our data centers. So that's it's not just our data centers. We include every office building in that number. We include every warehouse that we put Surface laptops in. Everything is a part of that. Okay, so when we say that we're 60% off grid, it's not just our data centers, it's our offices as well. Our goal is to be completely off of the dirty grid by 2030. It's like 2 carbon zero. Now that's a big deal. In order to get there, what we had to do is, I'm going to skip 2 down, is we had to start investing in other companies to help us. So when we are like pouring, this is, by the way, if you kind of peel back the onion a little bit further, there's actually inside of sustainability efforts, there are something called Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. We're working on all 3 of those. So Scope 1 is emissions that you're directly responsible for. Scope 2 is things that you influence, and Scope 3 is like things that you make that create carbon footprint for other people. Okay, so like an Xbox for us would be Scope 3. Like we make an Xbox, you plug it into your power supply at home, and it runs off of the grid. That's our Scope 3 emissions. We created it for you.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're also looking into that. So and that is actually really interesting. So
Absolutely.
we are creating a product that the consumer will use, which we know will consume power, obviously.
Yeah, so we track it all. We track our Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions all the way through the ecosystem. You know, our goal, though, is to be completely off-grid, primarily for Scope 1 emissions, by the way. You know, Scope 3 is something that, you know, you keep working on forever and ever. And then after we're investing $1 billion, you know, across all these companies. It's basically an investment fund to help us figure out a way to go carbon negative after 2030 to actually remove all of the carbon that we've created since we opened shop in the 1970s at Microsoft. So that's kind of the big goal. But we also focus on 2 other things here too. Well, many other things, but one of them is water. And we want to be at water zero by 2030. In other words, we want to, if rain is landing on our roofs of our buildings, we want to capture that and use it. We don't want to consume any more water out of the system either. And also another big element for us is protecting biodiversity. So we have a lot of investments in that $1 billion also that help us figure out like how we might be changing the ecology, and we store a lot of data. I'll give you some examples. One of the projects that we're working on is something called Project Florence, where we are building a language for every plant on the planet so that we can communicate with plants. And I'll leave that there, but those are real things. They're not like, you can go and look up on YouTube, look up Project Florence. You'll see a little device that lets us communicate with a tree. So, and speak the language signals of the chemicals that they put out and be able to go back and forth with them. Anyway, so that's just kind of big picture. I'm going to kind of boil this down in terms of like something that you can wrap your brain around just to compare and contrast. Like Holger said, he went on a tour with a large auto manufacturer. If I had 5 minutes to tell you something, this is what I would tell you just quickly. Here's the big differences between your data centers and Microsoft. And I know that this sounds inflammatory. If you're watching this, you're putting up your defensive wall right now. just bear with me, guys. I'm not trying to be offensive. What I'm just saying is if you step into our facilities, you feel this very quickly, okay? So a large customer data center would be in the 1 megawatt or 1 to 2, 3 megawatt range, and that would be a large one would be 2 to 3 megawatts. Power usage effectiveness, this PUE, is something that you're going to see a lot from us today. This is the way that we measure efficiencies of our facilities. So we don't guess. There is an industry standard called PUE, power usage effectiveness, that we use to figure out how efficient a data center is. And basically, it's pretty simple math. What you have at the numerator, the top number, is how much power are you drawing in at the edge of your data center. And then at the denominator, the lower number, is how much power is going directly to the racks of your server, switches, router, storage, because that's where you make your money. Unless you sell air conditioning units, that's where you make your money, right? So if you divide the total power by the power that only goes to the rack of stuff, and you would see that anything above that is waste. So conference rooms, light fixtures, air conditioning systems, air handlers, fire suppression systems, all of that is wastefulness in a data center. You might think of it as a necessity, but it's waste. So a normal data center for a customer would normally be at a 2 to 2.5 PUE. In other words, if you spend €1 on your data center to run your actual server, switches, router, storage, you're probably spending another $1 on everything else. So that's normal. The best data centers on the planet run at a PUE of 1.4. The best of our customers, in other words, you're wasting 40% of your money. Microsoft data centers start at 25 megawatts. That would be a really small data center for us. And they climb up into the hundreds of megawatts. And the best of our PUEs is somewhere hovering between 1.07 and 1.2. In other words, where you are wasting 40% of your power, we are wasting 7 to 20%. By the way, not marketing numbers. There is no value in us gaming these numbers. This is a reality check. Not like a marketing endeavor. If you're trying to figure out a way to game this number, you're not paying attention. Okay, so like we don't game this number. We try and figure out exactly what the PUE is. Okay, so that's point number one. Some of this efficiency you just get by scale, but other things are because of things that we're doing. Okay, typically companies, if you look in a data center, you would see raised floors. We don't do that anymore. We put everything on concrete. No more raised floors in our facilities. Companies use air conditioning. We do not. Almost everything in our data centers is Mother Nature cooled at this point. We run our data centers extremely hot. How hot? In Fahrenheit, someplace on the cold aisle side, around 65 to 72 degrees. I'm sorry, these are your data centers. Or 18 to 22 degrees Celsius. Our data centers start at 26 degrees Celsius, and then they get hotter. On the hot aisle side, I don't know what the Celsius number is here because I'm in the US, but on the cold aisle side in Chicago, like where I give tours, we run up to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so 26. On the hot aisle side, it gets to 148, which your data center would think it was on fire at that temperature. I think that's like 42 or 45 degrees Celsius or something. Okay, you would think your data center was on fire, and for us, that's normal activity. Okay. You decide, normally in your own data center, you ask Dell or HP or EMC, what do they want to sell you? We can't do that. We design our own hardware because we strip out everything that we don't want. I'll talk about this later. You automate a lot of the time or something. Yeah, go ahead, Corin.
Because the air temperature you're telling we have generally higher than what typically we would see on a customer data center. That means we cool less, meaning we could have a better energy efficiency.
Yes. So, yeah. Well, it also means things fail more frequently too. But for us, that's also a part of, it's not a problem. It's a part of what we plan for. So, we plan for things to fail in Azure. Now, by the way, SAP is a little bit unique in this. Okay. But like for normal Azure, we plan for this to fail. We run servers extremely hot because we know how long they'll run at that temperature, and we burn them out. We know that they'll run for this long at this temperature generally, so we run them as hot as we can to maintain about a 4 to 5 year lifespan of hardware. It used to be 4, now we've kind of stretched it out to 5, and we're doing some other things. Go ahead, question.
But actually, also that's obviously then also from a sustainability aspect can also be interesting. Yes, we're saving energy, but what do we do with the hardware? Do we just dump it in the ocean, or?
No, I'll talk about it. Yeah, I'll talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you automate sometimes, but in Azure, you think about it this way. We have millions and millions and millions of servers. If we were hitting Control-Alt-Delete to log into those, we would never stop hitting Control-Alt-Delete. Those are physical servers. And then there's virtual machines on top of that, right? So we have to automate everything. There is no ability for anybody to do anything manually. It just doesn't work in Azure. It's not possible. It's not possible. As a matter of fact, any manual automations are so out of bounds at Microsoft that they get recorded, audited, tracked. We can't do anything manually. It's all automated. Typically you would look to a vendor like EMC or, another vendor to say, how will you help us create a high availability and disaster recovery, right? And so that's hardware and software vendor defined. In ours, it's all software. We don't rely on a single piece of hardware to define our fault tolerance, our DR or HA. Everything is defined through software, okay? So big picture, like I said, if I had 5 minutes to kind of tell you what the big differences were between like what we see in normal data centers and ours, this would be it. Now, let's just this is where it's gonna get fun, okay? So let me just kind of explain to you like how things work in our, and role separations. Yeah, we'll leave that there. Just leave it. So if you let's just talk about the problem, okay? So like if you came to Chicago and got a tour of our data center with me, this is actually one of the slides that I have on the physical tour when you come into the building, okay? So this is, if you've ever been to Chicago, and you'll see this in a second, but this building is one of our data centers in the North Central US region. This thing has hundreds of thousands of servers and hundreds of thousands of, square feet. I always have to kind of rewrap my brain that I have to say this in meters, square meters and things, and I forget the math, so I apologize. But they're massive facilities. As a matter of fact, if you look across the road, this is an expressway. O'Hare Airport would just be north of this. So if you've ever flown into Chicago, you've flown into O'Hare Airport probably. It's just above this image. So this is something called the St. Charles Power Yard. And if you could see about 70 kilometers or 70 to 100 kilometers to the west, you would come across a town called Byron, Illinois, and that's where there is a nuclear facility. So that's what this is. This power yard is largely fed by that nuclear facility. Over here on the right-hand side, there's actually another power line. You can't see it. It runs along the edge of these train tracks. That's fed by coal, actually. It's called the Bedford Park Power Line. It comes into these buildings here and into the building at these 3 massive transformers. Now, just let me put this into scale for you. That one building is, like I said, I'm going to zoom out here. You're going to see this in a second. That one building is just south of O'Hare Airport. So this is where our building is. O'Hare Airport is right up there. And so that whitish blob is O'Hare Airport. This town down here is a town called Naperville. Now, Naperville has 140,000 homes in it. It is the second largest suburb of Chicago. That building consumes as much power as that town. And this is one of 12 buildings in this geography. As a matter of fact, at least, well, I don't know if it's 12. Before COVID, it was hovering around 9. Okay, so, and I know that we've built a bunch of other stuff. As a matter of fact, right up here, just north of O'Hare Airport, right about there where that little finger is, we just bought 37 acres of property. And we're converting that to another facility of ours. Okay, so most people would think of that one building as a massive building. Microsoft thinks of that as a really cute facility. So if you look at one of our larger facilities, like in the US, this is called US East 2, or East and East 2. This is in a town called Boynton, Virginia. Now, Boynton, this is the older generations of data centers. This picture is probably 3.5 years old at this point. You're seeing different generations of data centers. You'll notice these are basically tin sheds. So we have servers on concrete in tin sheds outside, cooled by Mother Nature largely, okay? Mm-hmm. In the next generation, what we had is a spine carrying network, water, and power, and then we had 2,000 servers per container. And so what you would see here is there's 50,000 servers in there. And then this is Gen 3.5, what we call Gen 3.5 or IT packs. These are servers and shipping containers, but they were basically modular. So they almost think of them like Lego bricks, where we could say this one is storage, this one is network, this one is servers. And so this here is about 260,000 servers of things. Like I said, it's an old picture. This, once again, if you thought that this was, and you can look at, this is a car, right? This is a parking lot. These places are massive. Now, like I said, this is an old picture. We ran out of space, so we extended it. This is 550 acres, which I did do the math here. It's 2.2 square kilometers, okay, of total data center now, about 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago. And if you look, this like grayish thing, that gray is this. This is what we call Gen 5 expansion, okay? So this is all full. So we bought another 110 acres, just six, now we're at 2.6 square kilometers down here, and we extended all of that, and that was built out. We ran out of power, and I have to kind of show you this one on a map because I can't even really do it otherwise. If I go to Boynton, Virginia, and we'll turn on the aerial view, and I'll show you, I've bookmarked it. Let's go to Boynton, Virginia. Here is the town of Boynton. Okay, so it's a fairly small town, in Virginia, just on the east coast of the United States. This is that first generation of stuff that I showed you, okay? This is that second generation of stuff that I showed you here. This is something we just started building on. This down here is US East 3, I believe. So now, if you look at the town of Boynton relative to our data center, we make the town look tiny. It's almost like the data center is the town, okay? So this is the problem, okay? So like, if you think about it from Microsoft's perspective, this is the number one thing that we care about. You think of the internet as an infinite resource where you say, give me 2,000 servers, Azure, and we just say magic happens. Yes, no problem. We think of this as a finite power problem, right? If you come to me and say, we need 2,000 servers and I don't have power to give you, it becomes an issue. So everything that we think about is, how can we optimize all of the power in our data centers?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
That's actually, I like this comparison that you made with the town Boynton looks very small compared to the data centers. It reminds me actually almost like with SAP and Waldorf. If you look at Waldorf, it also used to be a very small city, and then you have all these SAP buildings around it. So that's really, Waldorf is SAP basically.
Yeah,
actually, since we are talking about sustainability, and I see these pictures, obviously I guess there were trees everywhere, and I assume we cut them down for this. So are we doing anything about the trees here as well?
Yeah, well, we have to replant wherever we can. Obviously, that's an issue. But it's almost one of those issues that there are always trade-offs. So I don't know the answer to that one, though, Holger, to be honest with you. It's a great question. We remove trees. Of course, we have to remove trees. But it's, there is a heat map of the world where we actually figure out where to put data centers. And it's kind of like access to network, water, power, and skilled labor is actually a big issue for us. So, so anyways, as I kind of go even bigger, that we have 65 Azure regions now. So they're all over the globe. By the way, this number is kind of downplayed. If you, I'll stop there. But there's so many edge sites and data centers and things like that this number just grows so quickly. For a while, we were adding a facility every week or two for a long time, and it just doesn't seem to stop. Anyway, so just massive footprint. Okay, and I'm not telling you this to kind of say, oh, look at how massive this is a problem. Okay, it's a benefit and it's a detractor. Okay, so you think about all of the massive scale of what we do. Power becomes a really big concern for us. Yep. Okay, everywhere. So this is kind of the evolution of data centers, and I talked about this power usage effectiveness, right? So, and I'm not making these numbers up, by the way. These are industry standard numbers, and if you look at ours, these are kind of the way that we've grown, and you can see we've gone backwards in some cases because of different design principles. Okay, but these are different options that we've kind of evaluated over time. So when you started out in a traditional data center, that's what I said, this PUE was usually 2 to 2.5. So in your mom and dad's data center, they're wasting 100 to 150% of power on non-essential things from our perspective, like air conditioning. Non-essential, right? As we move into generation 2, where we basically did hot aisle containment, you sealed the walls between the cold aisle side of the data center and the hot aisle side. The best of those got down to 1.5 to 1.8. Starting in what we call generation 3. By the way, these are not industry naming. So when I say Gen 3, 4, 5, this is not an industry standard. This is Microsoft standard. Okay, we're talking to ourselves. In generation 3, and this is kind of small to see, I know, but it's like shipping containers on concrete, and each of those shipping containers held 2,000 servers. So, in Chicago here, this is what was in part of that space for a lot, in part of the space that I gave tours of for a long time. We've now transitioned away from this into something else, which I'll show you later. But like the idea here was on these shipping containers, you would have a completely separated cold aisle and a hot aisle, and it was cooled down by water, which was not largely not chilled. So we used Mother Nature to chill that water. And if the temperature got really hot out, then we would chill the water. But usually in this generation 3, we would only chill water when we had to, and otherwise we would use the air from the outside when it was like today. It was it's fall, so it's chilly-ish. So we would use that air to cool down the water, to cool down these containers. When we moved to Gen 4, what we would then do is we said, no more. We're not going to chill water anymore. We don't have to do that. So in these modular data centers, we took these containers that were in a warehouse and we put them outside. And if you could see this, I know it's a little small, but you essentially have a swamp cooler strapped to the container. So what that means is what we were doing is taking Mother Nature air, we were ramming it through essentially a wet sheet, and then putting that air into the data center, into the servers, and then the hot air would rise out here. So in generation 4, starting in 2012, this is when we got, we started getting serious about getting out of the air conditioning space. And so at this point, we're not using air conditioning anymore, and we're using river water, not even drinkable water. It was river water to cool these down. We learned a lesson here. This creates Legionnaire's disease in the actual in the containers themselves, which is a respiratory disease, kind of like COVID, but something you get by breathing air that has bacteria in it. So what we decided to do is move away from this swamp cooler stuff into larger facilities where we did the same thing. So in these larger facilities in 2015, we started using indirect evaporative cooling, which is basically almost like you take a straw filled with water and you blow air over the tube, and it's hot on this side and it's cold on the other side, but you're not mixing that dirty water with the air itself, right? So you're almost running it over a radiator like you would in a car, okay? And then we kind of took and by the way, look at these numbers going, kind of down, 40% wasted power here. Then we get down to 10 to 30% here. Then we're in the 17 to 25. Then we actually, we drop down a little bit further in 6. At this stage, though, we're not as worried about the PUE. We've actually started changing the designs to make them be built faster and with less materials. So in this case, when we moved to Ballard, really these are like glorified tin sheds outside, and we just, we kind of we push air, we push air in from the outside into these rooms, and we let them run hot, and we just recycle the air. So it was more about rapid deployment. And then, and as we move kind of the future, you'll see some of the crazy things that we're doing. Yeah. But
when I think, Paul, of 65 plus regions, and each region has a lot of data center, this is a huge saving on the
absolutely. Customers who have sustainability efforts, they can use our PUE to get to their sustainability goals.
Yep. That's
right?
what I was always thinking. Also thinking, yeah, that
So if they've got, and it's because we, and once again, I have to keep saying, I feel like I have to keep saying this. This is not a marketing number. These are physical numbers. If we're not doing this, you're gonna suffer. Like, we'll blow up the grid. If I'm consuming as much power as 140,000 homes, we mess up your grid. This is serious stuff for us. If we track PUE, like, it's the only thing that matters. And security and PUE, honestly, are the two. And and I just have other pictures here, and I'm gonna kind of, just so you can see, like, I had the same thing here, but like a little bit better view of the swamp coolers that we used to strap to the face of them, and things like that. So once again, our design goals are obviously, we have more than just sustainability here, but we have other design goals. But in general, PUE is it's the biggest deal that we worry about.
But it's also interesting to see that on the previous slide there was also carbon. So it's not only the power usage, energy, but it's also the impact on the environmental footprint, water usage, carbon usage. So we are also really actively monitoring and tracking these numbers, basically.
Absolutely. And when I get further into the slides here, I'll explain some of those for sure, Holger. But, there's just, when you see this reuse, this is a big deal. The carbon usage is a big deal. Cost management, all of these are important. Because look, if it costs us so much to build these facilities, then we have to pass that cost along to you too. So it's kind of like all of these things all together, they're all important, right? So, so anyways, let's talk a little bit about hardware. We cannot buy the hardware that you buy. And largely because, if you think about that problem for us, if we were asking like HP or Dell, like, hey, what do you want to sell us this month? Imagine how many different motherboards we would have, RAID controllers, lights out management cards, NIC cards. There'd be, HBAs, fiber HBAs. There would be so much to manage that it would become unmanageable for us. So what we do is we design our own. We basically tell the hardware manufacturers, here's what we want you to build us. And sometimes they say yes. And sometimes they will not buy it and build it for us, and so we buy it from somebody else. So if HP decides to drop out, we just go to Dell or somebody else and say, well, you build it for us. So when you look at these servers, you'll notice we take out a bunch of things that we don't care about. So for example, some of the things that you will not see on our servers, blinky lights is one of them. Those are just vanity. When you see a network card light or a hard drive light, that's just somebody wanting to put a logo in front of you. So we take off all the extra blinky lights. There are 2 lights on our servers, a power light and a failure light. That's it. There's no hard drive lights. There's no network card lights. We remove all that stuff. Other things that are missing, USB ports. We don't have USB ports in our servers because we don't need, there's also no keyboard video monitor ports because there's no reason to have for anybody to plug anything into these. There is no human with a monitor walking around trying to log into them. As a matter of fact, the people who work in our data centers have no clue what's running there. The people who work in our data centers, all they care about is power and water and air conditioning, if there is any. Okay, so like, there is no map saying your data is here in the data center. So why do they need a keyboard and a mouse anyways, right? So we take those off. The other thing that's missing is logos. When you look at our servers, there are no logos on our servers because those logos cost 5 cents a box in the US, and so we're not paying that money for your logo. So we strip them off. That when you buy millions of servers, that 5 pennies of logos, that costs a lot of money. So what you're left with basically is some hard drives, some processor, some memory, some storage, right? So this is an older view of it. This is the newer one. And the reason why this is important is we put some things back, by the way, but this is called open cloud servers. So these are open source servers, right? But within them, and this is important from a sustainability perspective, all of the guts, all the insides of them are interchangeable. So we have within this shell, we can take out the internals and replace like an Intel processor with an AMD motherboard and put an AMD in the same shell. If I want one that's processor optimized, I can give more room to the processors and less to the storage. If I want one that's storage optimized, I can put more storage in the box and give less room for the processors. If I could do the same thing with memory. So we basically have different shells. Here's the thing. When they die, we don't throw away the shell. All we do is replace the inside.
Good, yeah.
You know, so, and then we recycle as much of the insides as we can. So if the memory is still usable, we put those into, we give those to other people to use in devices that they can use them in. So we never throw anything away anymore. We call this circular data centers, and I'll talk about it a little later as well. And then we have different form factors, right? So we have it's about, I don't know, 10 centimeters high, whatever, 7 centimeters high. And then we have ones that are, twice as big, 3 times, 4 times as big in terms of height. But essentially, those are just replaceable. We keep the shell, we replace the insides. Okay. Yeah. In Chicago, we have moved away from those shipping containers that I showed you earlier, and we're doing this now. The important thing about this, though, is, so like, if this is legitimately how it looks. So what you have is essentially a bunch of racks exposed directly to the warehouse. If the temperature is in the warehouse is, I forget the temperatures in yours. I'm just going to go Fahrenheit, guys, here. Sorry. But if it's like a nice fall day, okay, think of it that way. Maybe a chilly fall day, all the way up to something like a summer day where you would wear a short sleeve shirt. We just use whatever that temperature is, and we feed it directly into the rack. If the temperature gets really cold, like ice outside, what we do is we take the hot air so air goes through these servers, it gets contained on the backside, and then it gets blown back out. If it's very cold outside, we actually close the window to the data center, essentially, and we use this to warm up the data center.
Interesting. Cool.
Okay. If it gets very hot outside, we may chill the water that's in this air handler and we'll turn it into an air conditioner. But if you think about that in terms of percentages, and I'll just use Chicago where I'm at, using this as an air conditioner was probably 10 days this year.
Yeah.
For the other 350 days, we used Mother Nature. Okay, so there was, and for some of those days, we turned this into a space heater. Okay, but what we don't, for most of the time, we're completely off of the grid from an air conditioning perspective. Okay, so the other important thing here is this. We have now moved away from powering our servers with alternating current. Okay, so let me I'm going to come back to the slide. So just remember this little UPS skid. I'm going to come back to this. So if you look at this is that Chicago data center that I started with. If you look at this from the top down, these are the big transformers that take power from the big lines that come in, right? But if you think about the way that power moves through the building, and this is an older building, so I'm just going to talk about old school and new school. So what we have is big power here, okay? And what we do is we put that into generators in case we lost power, but behind those generators inside the data center, we have batteries, right? So if we lost power to the data center, we would run off the batteries and then we would turn on the generators fed because we didn't have power coming into these lines, okay? So, but the problem here is that if you think of this in terms of alternating current and direct current, what we have actually gone from is alternating current here coming off of the power line. Yeah. And then we go into direct current, and then we go back to alternating current. Okay, and then we put this into the server. But each time we step between alternating current and direct current, we lose 12 to 17% of the power. Yeah. And we've done it twice. So in this, we've gone AC, DC, DC, AC. So we've lost something like 24 to 34% of the power that was here. So what we do now, and this is why I mentioned those UPS skids, is we go big power, and then we step down the power from 125,000 volts down into 440 volt circuits. Then we put that into 220 volt circuits in those racks, and then we basically turn our servers into laptops. If you think about your laptop, it runs off the battery. All you're doing is using the power supply next to it to feed the battery. So if you pull the plug on your laptop right now, it just runs. We're doing the same thing now in servers. So when you look back at this image, we actually use this UPS skid as a DC backplane, and each of the servers has a little battery in them.
Okay,
and what we have now gotten back is 12 to 17% power gain.
Okay,
Mhm.
cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that
Yep.
does. Absolutely.
And we're also out of these lead acid batteries too, by the way, terrible for the environment. These are, the batteries that used to be here. Oh, if I went back here, these batteries that used to be here, they're lead acid batteries. They're very corrosive. So these are hazardous as well. So we're trying to get out of those. By the way, when we move them to lithium ion, they can actually start on fire. We have different problems there, but they're not as corrosive.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Does that make sense so far, guys?
It does.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So if you think about now this is if I kind of go this one layer up, this is an image that we stole from the United States Department of Energy. So this is their facts and figures, not Microsoft's facts and figures, okay? So when you look at the traditional data center, okay, if you think about that in terms of a pipeline that gets you power. So if we're talking about coal or natural gas, from the time that we pull the raw material out of the ground till the time it gets to our data center, we lose something between 40 and 60% of the potential power that came out of the earth. Okay, 40%. Now, if you think about that, it all makes sense because it requires power to scrape that out of the earth or to pump it out of the earth, right? So if you're using an oil pump, it requires power to pump, right? Then you pump that oil over through a pipeline to a refinery. That takes power. It takes power to run the refinery. It takes power to send that that refined fuel to the electrical facility. And then when the electrical facility puts it into the wires, we lose 6% of the power just right there because it just leaves the wires. When you're driving past high power lines, you can hear them crackling.
Yeah.
Those are electrons coming off of those power lines, right? So, one of the other thoughts that we have is how could we get this 40% of the power back? So one of the things that we're working on is just saying, how about if we put the power right next door to the data center? Okay, so the way that we're doing this in one of our other data centers here in the United States called Cheyenne, Wyoming, is that we have a 3 kilowatt rack running off of cow poop. And I'm not making that up. Okay, I'm being a little funny, but it's basically something high in methane, like cow poo or pig farms or landfill. If you've ever been next to landfill, they have an odd smell because methane is coming off of them. And what they do is they have a flame that is that they burn to burn off the methane so it doesn't turn just into greenhouse gas. Okay, so what we've done in Cheyenne, Wyoming is we basically use this process to run our data centers. We're using hydrogen. It's basically hydrogen. So the way that this works is at the top of the box, you have something called a cathode on one side and an anode on the other, and then a membrane in the middle. And what happens is what you do is you take the oxygen-rich fuel on this, the hydrogen-rich fuel on this side, and you have oxygen on this side. And what happens is electromechanically, it pulls electrons away from the hydrogen towards the oxygen, and then we feed those electrons directly down into the rack. Okay, so this is the way that works. And you're kind of seeing it in a split screen here. We have a cathode and an anode, and this is the hydrogen, here's the oxygen. And what happens is we capture the electrons off of that, and we drag those down into the rack of servers. So we basically use methane or poo or something to feed the data center. The output of that is water. When you do this electromechanical stuff, it basically generates water. We use that water to cool down the facility. Okay, so we're generating our own water.
So basically, you're generating the electricity and as well water to cool it down.
Correct. So and this is what it looks like in Cheyenne, Wyoming. However, I would say that we're not using this as the primary source. We're using it as the backup source because you just can't get enough methane off of a pig farm or a cow farm to fuel a whole data center. So what we do is we store that hydrogen-rich fuel, and we use this now for disaster recovery. So instead of running diesel generators, which are terrible for the planet, by the way, diesel fuel is, obviously a CO2 emitter. What we do instead is we capture the CO2 from this high methane output. If you don't know, like cow farts and burps are very bad for the planet. They're terrible for the planet. So instead, what we're trying to do is capture some of that stuff, use it as fuel for our data centers, and then in the event of a failure, we will power our data centers off of that, but we won't use diesel energy anymore. So we're getting out of the diesel game. This is the new this is the new disaster recovery solution for us. So we are eliminating all of our diesel generators. Like if you went back 4 images where I showed you the overhead view of Chicago and I showed you the generators, we're pulling all of those out and we're replacing them with this. Cool. So we're getting off of the diesel grid as well. Few more slides here, and then guys, I'm going to give you, and then we have lots of questions. Okay, so like one of the things that we're working on is liquid cooling. Now, people think, oh, we've been doing this for a long time inside of my gaming rig. You know, that is not what I'm talking about here. So this is, you know, what you'll see originally in terms of cooling is we used to run just like a little chilled radiator, you know, using liquid, almost like an air conditioner on top of your processor. And then we moved to something called single phase immersion, which basically means we take this non-conductive liquid and we dip the server in it. And basically you'll see we're taking, you know, using the liquid here as it's called single phase immersion. The idea there is basically you do all of what you were doing here directly at the motherboard. So it's much more efficient. But what we've moved to recently is something called dual phase immersion, where basically we submerge the entire server side by side next to each other inside of a tank of this liquid that doesn't conduct electricity. And so if you think about that from our perspective, first of all, this liquid is way better at removing heat from the motherboards, way better. Air is a terrible medium for taking heat off of things. It's like you're encouraging it. With this, you're actually sucking the heat off of the motherboard. So these run much hotter, like 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Like it would be uncomfortable to put your hand in it for very long, but the servers are comfortable in this temperature because it's so efficient at removing heat. Notice the PUE in terms of servers. Now we've gotten this down to like 2% wasted power. Okay. Not the whole data center, but wherever we're running this dual phase immersions. The other thing is we can overclock the servers at the processors. Now we get more processing power out of the server. So for your SAP HANA workloads, this would be kind of important, right? You know, it's good to have a ton of memory, but it's also good to have a little bit more processor. Okay, so, and the other benefit is we can shrink our data centers down about 2 to 3x. So if it took us all of those square kilometers to run a data center before, imagine if I could now take that and squish it down by 1/3. That's what we're doing. So then I get all of this power back as well. So this is the way it looks in Boynton, Virginia. We basically have these 2 shipping containers, and in those shipping containers, this is what you would see, is these servers, thousands of servers running side by side in liquid. And this is exactly how they work now.
No danger of shortcut there.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't conduct electricity. This liquid, it's a liquid created by 3M. Okay. It's a non-corrosive, non-conductive liquid. So the servers don't know that they're running in this liquid. As a matter of fact, if you put your hand in it and take it out, it evaporates almost immediately. So when they're running, it's like a terrarium. These run more like a terrarium. So what happens is there's like a dome over the top, and the heat gets converted into bubbles. Those bubbles rise to the top, they explode, and then what happens is when they dissipate that heat, the humidity of it actually gathers at the top of the dome, and then it comes back down on the sides and it recycles. So you don't have to refill these tanks either. It's kind of, it runs like a terrarium. It's like self heat. It just, you occasionally have to put a little liquid in there, but not much.
Okay. Cool.
Yep. I talked about the circular data centers. We now have, I think 4 of our regions now are completely circular, meaning that whenever anything comes out, if we have to throw something away, which we in general we don't, we try and reuse as much, or give away or reuse as much as we can. For any of those parts that don't, what we do is we basically recycle them within the building itself. Meaning, so like, remember I said we have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. A scope 1 emission would be like, hey, I had this, I deliver like Amazon, for example, their package delivery trucks are scope 1 emissions. Okay. So like one of the things, scope 2 would be like, hey, I need you to come pick up my recycled hardware, right? So, or my hardware, so you can recycle it. That would be a scope 2 emission. You've basically put that burden on somebody else. Okay. So what we're doing in our data centers is we basically, if we can recycle it down to its lowest part, we do that before we bring the truck over, so that the truck isn't, so that the other people who are doing the recycling aren't doing as much. They're basically taking this material and sending it this way and sending that material in a different place, but they're not figuring out how to separate those materials. We separate them for them so that we reduce their carbon footprint. Make sense? So once again, we reuse the shells of our servers. We recycle whatever we can in the building. We separate everything out. We take whatever can be used still, like memory. If it's still good, we give it to other people to use in their products so that they're not having to buy memory. Okay. So we reuse as much as we can. This is something called Project Natick. Now here, what you're looking at is, the design problems here that we're trying to solve for 4 core issues. One is that could we use the the temperature of the ocean to cool a server? Okay. 2, could we use the waves that are running in the ocean to power the data center, to power this container? 3, most 80% of the world's population lives within 30 kilometers of water, of a large body of water. So could we put data centers closer to people? 4, bad guys tend to not scuba dive. So when we put these servers at the bottom of the ocean, they just run down there. We're using the temperature of the ocean to cool them down. We're using the waves to power them. We use, because nobody can see them, they're just kind of out of sight, out of mind, and it's close to the people who need access to the data center, right? So what we do to do this is that we basically, what you're looking at is 2,000 servers essentially in a submarine tube. And here what we're doing, this top part is us pouring like tons of and it's 120,000 gallons. I don't know what that is in liters, but it's more, like 200 some odd liters, 200,000 some odd liters, I think, of water over the face of these servers every hour, basically to cool them down. So these are running very cold and they're very happy. So to do this, the way that this works is we basically have 2 barges with a gantry between them. We bring these out to the middle of the ocean. We drop them into the water. We plug in a network cable. That cable runs back on land, and it also carries power for us as well. So if we need more power from on land, we bring it over. If for some reason we're generating more power than we put it back on land. This comes up, it's buried on, off of the shore, it's buried, and then we bring it into a building and nobody ever sees it, right? By the way, the other nice thing about these, from the time you say build a data center until the time this is running, 30 days. I don't know that anybody who can build a data center in 30 days. Never, right? So, but with this, I can have a fully running data center at the bottom of the ocean within about 30 days. Okay, and what we learned is that these servers are extremely happy down here. One of the things that we worried about, though, was were we harming the ecology? So so what we did is we ran a test at the bottom. This is actually something called Azure Cognitive Services. We measured the pH of the water, the temperature of the water. We measured the fish that were living around it, and nothing changed. As a matter of fact, the only thing that happened is these cameras got algae on them, and we had to send a diver down 100 meters to go and clear the algae off of the cameras. So what we were doing, though, is measuring the amount of fish and seeing if they were happy or if we were seeing death or any of that. Nothing. We didn't make any difference whatsoever. So this is the way that these look now. This is the 3rd iteration of Project Natick. We basically drop these down in groups. And the one thing I can't show you is that there are these massive fans that are strapped to these now, and they capture the wave energy to power them. But each of these contains about 2,000 servers. So in this, we would have 12? So 24,000 servers in this pod. These are how we raise, and these tubes are how we raise and lower them. And we basically run them completely down at the bottom of the ocean. And they are, like I said, extremely happy, because what we do is we pull all the air or the oxygen out of them, and we replace it with like nitrous oxide, which is like an inert gas. But the nice thing about it is it doesn't corrode the servers at all. So there's no corrosion, there's no airflow, nobody's down there playing with them. They run really cold, they fail less, like they fail like 80% less actually than the servers that are on the ground on land. So they're very happy.
So can you really generate enough electricity for?
No, we don't generate enough electricity to power them all today. But once again, it's just a little less power that we have to take off of the grid, right? So if I can get, even if I can get 40% of the power from the waves, then I only need 60% coming off of land. Yep. I only have like 2 more things to show you here, so we're almost done, guys. This I've been talking about for a long time. One of the other problems that we've been trying to solve is like, there's multiple problems that we're trying to solve on storage. One of them is that by the year 2025, we estimate that there's going to be 175 zettabytes of total storage. If you looked at that today, I think it's hovering around 120. So like, you know, the point is after 2025, we think that that's going to double every 2 to 3 years because companies are just hoarding all this data. So one of the problems that we've got is, where are we going to put all this storage? Today, that total amount of disks, if you just thought of those as disk drives, that each zettabyte would represent 1/5 the size of New York. Okay. So in other words, if we've got 100 zettabytes, and we've got more than that, we got about 120, but if we had 100 zettabyte, we would have, what is that? 5 times 20, you know, we'd have 100 Manhattans of hard drives or something, like laying flat on the earth. And then it's going to double. So where are we going to put all these hard drives? Okay. And how are we going to power them? So what Project Silica is, it's our ability to store data completely at 0 power once it's created, and in a way that's extremely durable, and in a way that doesn't, you know, like so what we're basically doing is we're etching glass, okay, with a laser. So the other thing is, it's like I said, EMP proof. So if an electromagnetic pulse hit the earth, we would still have access to all of our data. It would all be there. So the way that I used to have this slide up, I've had this slide in some of my decks for 5 years, and I was like, I wonder if that's ever going to go anywhere. Last week, we made a major announcement on Silica. And so this is a video that I'm just going to talk over. But basically the way that this works now is you have a laser that's etching this glass, and it just gets stored. And if you need to bring it back, you know, this is what you'll see. This is called a femto laser. It's basically a laser that's pulsing 1 billion times a second. And what we're doing is creating these little voxels, which are essentially 3D pixels, into glass. And what we then do is we put them down in layers, 200 layers on a 2 millimeter piece of glass. So there's 200 layers on a 2 millimeter piece of glass. And on that one piece of glass, that one little piece of glass right there, I can store 7 terabytes of data. This is the little machine that will take the glass, once it's been etched, and move it into the place that it's stored. And once again, once you have it in glass, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't generate any power. So unlike tape that you need to rotate and you need to upgrade occasionally because tape gets demagnetized, this will just live forever. And once you write the glass, there is no way to overwrite it. So the writer will not take the glass in once it's been written. So that's why we say warm storage. It's write once, read many. Yep. So this is that little machine that will move the glass into its slots. I thought that this was a cute little animation, but what I didn't realize is we were done with this. So this is the next video of it running in production. So these little machines here, what they actually do is those are those 7 terabytes per piece of glass. And what this machine does is, whenever you need to go and archive something, the machine will, there's a little robot, and it attaches. And what it does is it just says like, hey, I'll go put something into this, I'll go grab it out of the writer, and then it moves it into the reader. The other thing that's cool about these is all these robots can move autonomously around each other. So you put them in rows, they can switch rows, they can switch, they can switch racks too. They can move between racks. And so you'll see, like, when they start to get in each other's way, they'll figure it out. Like you'll see in a second here. It's like, oh, you're in my way, another one's in my way, and it'll just kind of move around it. But the benefit.
Oh, cool.
There it is. So you get this, but the neat thing is 0 power for all of this. Once it's stored, and there's
yeah.
If we need to add more, you just snap them into each other, add more. But the really cool, like I said, the cool thing is that they can even move sideways. So they can move up and down, but they can also move sideways between the racks. So here you'll see one's going to avoid the other here and move around them. So like I said, I think the thing I want you to take away from all of this, guys, is that this is not one problem for us. We've got storage problems. We've got compute problems. We've got recycling problems. We've got water problems. We've got, all of these issues that come together, and we're working on all of them. And it's, it's not, this isn't busy work for us. This isn't marketing work. This is all things that we have to do. It's not a nice to do. It's a must do, because we're a big user of the power, and we have to be mindful about it. So that was the last slide I had for you guys.
Wow. Amazing.
Perfect, Paul.
A lot, huh? I think there were. Go ahead, Holger.
No, I just wanted to. There were so many things, and I think what I especially liked, it was not only about electricity consumption. I mean, yes, we're doing a lot of work there, but really putting this concept of this circular, what was it called? Circular data centers,
yeah.
That we're really looking into this. That we're considering storage. Honestly, something that I had not thought about, but that is a huge topic, obviously. And with project Silica, I think that looks like a very interesting technology, and apparently it is already running. So that was also.
It is, yeah. There's something called the entire MSR library. So Microsoft Research, they did them since they created the technology. They figured, well, we'll dog food it ourselves. So what they did is they said everything that every research paper that we've ever created, every video that we've ever created, we're going to store it on Silica. And that's what you're seeing there is all of the content that they have created in MSR on Silica.
Wow.
And it's now what we're trying to figure out is a way to scale it. So there's fun. By the way, I've got so many other things to talk about, but there's Project Palix where we're storing things in DNA. There's Project Florence that we're communicating with plants. Like I told you, there's Project, all these initiatives to capture pollution data, to capture biodiversity information. Like there's so many things that we're working on here that I could just go. I could have easily gone for another hour, but I hope this was useful.
No, I think that was fantastic, and I think that this was a perfect impulse. A lot of insights in what we are doing today, and I mean, if I just look at the history, like even 8 years ago, I like this data center evolution. The things that we have changed there already, and I'm sure in the next few years there will be more and more stuff that we'll work on. So I'm sure we'll have you back just to talk about this one as well.
I hope so. Yeah, this is, guys, I'm getting into, at some point I'm going to have to come to Germany and we're going to do this in person.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, that would be fantastic.
For podcast 307 or whatever it is. I know they're on 160. Maybe we'll make a deal. If we get to 300, I'm coming out to Germany and we're doing this in person.
Absolutely.
That's perfect.
So, well, I look forward to coming back to that. I know Holger and Gordon, I think we want to talk about some more security things next time.
Yes.
We just made a bunch of announcements at Ignite, and so I'm looking forward to showing you a bunch of those things. And but I love these conversations. Thanks for having me.
Great.
No, thank you, Paul. Again, that was really, really insightful, and I think this were some fantastic ideas on what we are doing there. So thanks very much. And as you said, we'll definitely have you on the show again to talk about the security topics.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Paul.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.